All right, welcome to the Jim Acosta Show. We're following the latest in the killing of far-right activist Charlie Kirk. Authorities announced today that a suspect, Tyler Robinson, has been arrested. The facts, folks, they're still murky surrounding this suspect, so probably best to use caution in drawing any sweeping conclusions, but some information is starting to come in, and my first guest this hour is a progressive Gen Z influencer, Jack Cottrella. Jack has a huge audience on YouTube now. He's also on Substack. Recently interviewed Zoran Mamdani, which I want to talk about in a few moments. But Jack, great to see you. And you and I have been talking about this for some time. I'm glad we finally made it happen.
I know this is very exciting. Independent media coming together, and I hope the clash of the audience, everyone is very excited. We all got to be doing this more. I think it's so important, and I'm glad to be joining you.
Absolutely. And forgive me, I hate doing this when I have Gen Z influencer on, but I feel like this is important because the suspect has been arrested. He's 22 years old. We don't know a lot about him, but a lot of the assumptions that were being made on the right about who this shooter was going to be, that ended up being wrong. They thought it was going to be somebody who was trans and somebody who was going to be a far leftist and all of this stuff. And he's a young man from Utah and grew up apparently in a family that used a lot of guns and seemed pretty conservative. But the other thing that I thought was interesting in some of the information that has come out, some of the stuff that the authorities put out there, is that he was a gamer and had lots of different beliefs. I guess there was, according to the New York Times, an engraving on an unfired cartridge said, "Hey, fascist, catch." But another said, "If you read this, you are gay, LMAO," obviously meaning laugh my ass off. And then there were also references to up arrow, right arrow, three down arrow symbols. This apparently is derived from a video game called Helldivers 2. Another engraving, notices bulges, OWO, what's this? Apparently a phrase used for trolling an online role-playing community. So, I mean, Jack, obviously you're a little closer to this age bracket than I am, and maybe the culture a little bit.
Yeah.
Your thoughts? I know you've been wanting to say something about that.
I am a little upset with how online I am to know everything that is being referred to and the very close connection. And I'm really glad that you have made this specific point, which I feel like has been lacking in this coverage of the connection to the gaming community. There is such an overlap. I don't want to say in like people who play video games, but the streaming community and the way that we have seen the rise of a kind of conservative movement and what people call the manosphere, and think of Joe Rogan, but it really extends out to figures like Andrew Tate or Aiden Ross or the Nelk Boys as well. And the reason why you have these communities thrive online is because in many ways they're self-sustaining through the clipping environment that was largely built up by a figure like Andrew Tate. If I can take everyone back to, I guess it would be like 2022. You heard about this guy online, this horrible misogynist saying terrible things. And he had this program called Hustlers University. And what that was for Andrew Tate was it was largely young guys learning how to clip his videos. That would be the content that he would provide them, build up social media accounts on TikTok or Instagram or Facebook or whatever it would be. And those would become profitable. It was largely about teaching people how to clip content from streaming platforms like Twitch or Kick, which is the more conservative of them, and to post them everywhere. And so you have this self-sustaining economy of people who clip for a living. It is their job, not because they are being instructed by dark money or anyone, but by the nature that it is very economically successful for them to clip these people pushing conservative ideology, whether they mean to or not. In the gaming community, this is something that you've really seen a rise in over the past decade. And so much of that is already baked in some of the reporting that I've read. And I'm also glad you made this point as well. Even over the past couple of days, I've felt uncomfortable showing photos that the FBI has put out or any initial reporting, just because I don't trust it. And I hate that we are in that place. But initial reporting that I've seen, and what I suggested, considering that we've seen a really explosive growth of Nick Fuentes' platform, someone who's been extremely combative with Charlie Kirk, is that it was one of his people, the Groypers, they're called. And it seems like initial reporting suggests that this kid thought that Charlie Kirk wasn't conservative enough for him. That's
Mm.
kind of where I came from when I, realized that, of course, this is in Utah. This is, like, at least from initial reports, was just a 22-year-old white guy. That's where I thought it was going to be. And the place that lands is really scary for a MAGA movement that I don't think wants to reevaluate any of its rhetoric. But that is kind of my full breakdown of how all of those things come together. And it's very worrisome.
Yeah, I mean, and Jack, we don't even know. We don't know everything. I mean, that's the thing. We just don't know everything at this point. There are indications that it could be something like that. I mean, it very well could be something like that. But I mean, to me, and this is what I was emphasizing on Wednesday and on Thursday, is like, you just got to wait for all the facts to come in. And that was sort of what I had a problem with what was going on the right and on Fox. And so there was just this rush to just slam the left, go after people who aren't like the viewers at Fox and so on, and create this boogeyman. And I think a lot of people are getting their worlds rocked today because they just this is just a very nebulous thing at this point. It could be what you're saying. It could be from that world that was sort of to the right, even of Charlie Kirk, which is extraordinary. But I mean, this kid was troubled too. The authorities were saying that he only spent one semester in college despite having a scholarship, and it's possible he was kind of just swept up in this online gaming culture that can get very radical.
So much of, not just what the big platforms want, but, you have to think about the much smaller economies in all of these spaces. I talk about this a lot with the health and wellness space. These are people who preach a message of buy my supplement on the fact that they're saying, well, big pharma is making a profit off of you. That's why you should engage in my endeavor for profit of selling you this supplement or whatever it is. But you see that a lot with the attention economy, with just creators online, like especially with young men. You're seeing so many be told that just like, you shouldn't go out, like no, man or woman is interested in you. You're not going to be able to date anyone. It's like, we call it like rage bait. It's like just these things to like purposefully designed to get people upset, not just for that one click or comment or engagement, but because long-term, these like very far right communities are sustained by people not going outside, people not engaging in the multicultural project that is America, not being on college campuses where you hear different ideas and you interact with people different from you, and you realize they're not that bad, they're just people. And so that is so much part of this, that we have like just a real crisis of, and I don't even want to call it like faith necessarily, but it's kind of, it feels that way, where it's just like who we are as people has kind of been rocked. And I see that so much with my generation, especially with the crisis of loneliness. But again, it's just perpetuated by everything that exists in this online space. And like you see it play out right now.
Yeah. And Governor Cox of Utah, who I thought he made some very positive comments. I think he was much more unifying than Trump has been, and a lot of other people on the right. And
he didn't talk about the ballroom. That was Trump's first thoughts.
I saw that. I was going to play that a little bit later, but you touch on a good point. I mean, Cox was saying during his remarks that people need to go outside and touch grass.
Yeah.
That to me was another indication that the information that they're gleaning from this case and from this this young man's profile was that he was just immersed in this stuff. The other thing I want to ask you about was Charlie Kirk's hold on Gen Zers. And I mean, when you saw the video, obviously what took place on Wednesday, I don't want to play it again, but he had another big crowd there. He gets these big crowds. Jack, your sense of why he had this pull inside Gen Z, because this has been a subject that I've been fascinated with for some time. And I would love to know what is going on and how somebody like Charlie Kirk, again, had some very extreme bad faith views, I thought, how he could attract such a cult-like following.
Well, I think partially it's because my generation has kind of been raised on the politics for sport. Like that is people who, can't remember a time without Trump. Seeing those first Republican debates when we decided like we weren't doing decorum and we were just doing, bottom of the barrel. I think that's largely the appeal of Charlie Kirk. I've read some really interesting polling. You even look at Dean Withers, who's a much more liberal sort of figure like Charlie Kirk. He's a debater. He does TikTok. It kind of breaks down news, sort of like that. His audience is incredibly conservative on social issues, because largely where they're coming from is just an interest in kind of this like gladiator style debate of people going back and forth. And ultimately, when you have online spaces in which people are debating and you're introduced to, and I didn't think Charlie Kirk was that charismatic, but clearly he was, you know, a pretty successful speaker with what he built with Turning Point USA. You can't really detract from what he was able to build. But when you introduce people to charismatic figures pushing outlandish ideas, you know, I kind of term it like insanity immersion. Again, it's the Andrew Tate phenomenon. When you interact with outlandish ideas that are kind of spun to be a little funny and jokey and to push the envelope, especially on the cultural issues, eventually it starts to seep in, not only because you see it so much, but you just kind of have to interact in one way or another. That's what Nick Fuentes does really well. You know, there's some very viral Reddit posts right now about liberals saying, well, there's a lot of things that I agree with Nick Fuentes on. And I found myself listening to him because he's a charismatic figure. But these people also try to be funny. And they try to engage in the topics that are a little bit more apolitical perceiving. And I think that's been a real struggle for Democrats, not only to just like find those spaces where we can position ourselves on the apolitical issues. Like, I think if you ask just kind of an average American their views on Ukraine, it seems more like a cultural issue to them. The health and wellness space seems like a lot more of a cultural issue rather than one being decided by policy. And those inherently, at least through these online spaces, have been tilted towards the right. And so Democrats either need to find a way to engage with that or to make their own apolitical seeming issues. If you had talked about health and wellness a decade ago, it sounds like a liberal idea. If you had talked about your opposition to a continued endless war, it sounds like a liberal idea. Even, you know, free speech or advocating for marriage equality, these are things that weren't, you know, maybe the talking points necessarily, and some were, of political campaigns. But that's what we have failed to win on. And this idea that Charlie Kirk was like the free speech guy, I find a little ridiculous. Like, he was a go to college campuses for profit. If he cared about speech and thoughtful debate, he would debate or would have debated an expert.
But there was like a professional wrestling quality to it. And, you know, it was all about like, you know, body slamming your opponent, rhetorically speaking, and so on. And he would bring a lot of bad faith arguments to the table. I mean, I don't want to go down the road, and I'm maybe I'm old fashioned. I'm not a big fan of speaking ill of the dead, but and I think some time needs to pass before we really focus in on his views. But I think that conversation is going to happen. But what does the Democratic Party need to do? Because, I mean, Jack, you were out there campaigning with Kamala Harris, I remember, and you were out there with Joe Biden from time to time, and you were with Mamdani just recently. I want to play that clip. But let's play the Mamdani clip, and let's use that to jump into the conversation, because you interviewed Mamdani, Zohran Mamdani, the mayoral candidate in New York City. Let's talk about that. I think it'll help us open up the conversation.
Both that and Indians are the Italians of Asia. Like, it's this relationship.
Is this a squad moment? Can we make it official?
Yeah, 100%. Squad. It's Little Spoon and me.
We made it happen.
It's extraordinary. Now I could call the Mamdani people and they'll be like, yeah, Jim, take a hike. We're never going to talk to you. But Jack comes along, Gen Z influencer and so on. They're like, yes, sign us up. We'll do it immediately. We'll have ice cream.
I also must say, this is the thing that I love most about that clip. My hair looks terrible. We were walking around all day. It was funny. We were doing a little walk and talk. We sat in Marcus Garvey Park. It was very nice.
Both
we finished it up with a little bit of ice cream. But the thing I love most about that clip is that you can see my fingers are just like red because they're thawing because it was so cold outside. And I always have to point that out because I'm like, that is how early I was to this campaign. Not that I want to be
cool.
the guy.
I guess I shouldn't have said recently. This was a while back.
Recent in terms of everything feels like it was 10 years ago, but also yesterday in this environment. But you know, like, that's the thing. I don't want to be like I was there in the rock band before you were, or whatever it is. But
I remember covering the Obama campaign in 2008, and there was sort of a game that went on. It was like I was there, I was covering this before you did, and I discovered Obama before you did, and so on. And but let's talk about, you know, Gen Z, the progressive base. Do you see, you know, Gen Z, I mean, your generation having a chance to really take a look at folks like Mamdani and other progressive leaders and maybe be able to compete on the terrain that Charlie Kirk was very successful at? I mean, let's just face it. I mean, your thoughts on all that.
He certainly was. And, you know, I think I think the key in all of this is, like, of course, your ability to speak, your ability to communicate in digital spaces, and not to say that just like, and the boiled down response after Zoran won was like, oh, he was good at memes, which was a complete misreading. He had a
Totally.
platform that was aspirational and exciting. He animated tens of thousands of volunteers to knock millions of doors. It was like, it wasn't just like, oh, he was good online and he's a handsome guy, even though, you know, that's certainly part of it. But I think you have to understand that, you know, largely political messaging has become virality. It's the same thing. And the key to virality is, like, you know, you got to say something that gets people interested. You got to say something that gets them upset a little bit. You have to frame a villain, and you have to pick something niche and explain it. And I think that certainly works very, very well on the city government level, especially as so much of the conversation around Zoran was so combative. It was, oh, you think you're going to freeze the rent? Well, how are you planning on doing that? And he loved having that conversation. And when you can say, well, as mayor, I control the rent guidelines board, I appoint these officials to vote in favor and in reflection of what the state of affordability is in New York, that is a very clear and animating idea to give someone that makes them say, wait a second, this is a real guy. I can trust him. He's explained something to me, and you come away feeling smarter. You know, we opened by talking about, you know, whatever you're seeing out of the FBI, whatever you're seeing about initial reports, like maybe it's not right to jump on that and have full trust in that. And I don't think that's a bad thing to say, but that's certainly the project of Donald Trump's administration, right? It is distrust in government. It is.
That's true.
And
you're
so,
absolutely right.
If you are a progressive, the opposite should be the case. It's not just like abundance make government work. Government working is great, but Joe Biden made a lot of government work. People didn't realize or understand it, though. And so
that's true.
I think is so
to the point where Donald Trump is now putting his name on infrastructure projects that were
exactly
part of Biden's administration.
Clearly
it's wild.
Wasn't enough. And to me, I think the great undertaking right now, if you want to return us to a place where we actually see ourselves in democracy, is the project of explaining. And Zoran does that very, very well. Graham Plattner does that very, very well. Bernie and AOC, whenever you watch those 2-minute clips of them, no matter how you feel about their politics, you always come away feeling like you've learned something. And that's very animating.
And it's also, the affordability issue is such an important issue right now. And it resonated so well for Mamdani in New York because it is so goddamn expensive. In New York, it's just totally out of control and ridiculous. And the way he communicated about it, to your point, was so effective. But this affordability issue, I think Democrats and progressives would be, I mean, they would be, wise to continue to talk about this because it's so acute for Gen Z. It's a really important issue for millennials.
And you can see in the polling of at least young men who voted for Trump, the 18 to 22 was disproportionately larger than that 23 and 25. And it's because you can't, as a 24-year-old, some people do, and some people, and it's fine for them, usually go back and kind of raid mom and dad's pantry, right? And so you're not going to be confronted with the reality of affordability. And I mean in terms of polling for Trump positively. Still, people aren't realizing, a lot of the younger guys who are still at school and maybe recognize the crisis of affordability, but haven't actually, interacted with it in the real world because they, still are in college mode. I'm jealous. Even though, I was kind of ready to wrap up those classes at the end doing all these videos and all this work a day. But you see that very clear distinction is that the people who don't realize how badly Trump has kind of screwed my generation, who haven't graduated yet, into unemployment numbers that we've never seen for young people, like the lack of access to the job market. It's very distinct.
And what about the national debt? I mean,
they're
going to explode the national debt. I mean, that is going to get, your generation is going to get saddled with that debt. Who knows what that means for programs like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and so on. I mean, obviously Medicaid and the so-called big, beautiful bill is going to get decimated. And, I think that I just don't know if enough folks in Gen Z, especially on the conservative side, on the MAGA side, have even focused in on this. They're so swept up in these cultural issues, in these Charlie Kirk-like cultural issues.
And honestly, if I was a Democratic messaging strategist, I would not turn my nose at the idea of talking more about the national debt. Now, I wouldn't necessarily frame it as we are the party of fiscal responsibility and talk very, strictly about budgets. But this is kind of in going back to the point of like explaining. It's an immersive, I don't even know what word I'm trying to say there.
Amorphous, maybe?
Yeah, thank you very much. I got tongue-tied there. Amorphous idea. You're the pro here. I've been doing this for not as long of a time.
It's Friday. I'm feeling the brain fade something fierce. It's been one hell of a week.
I slept for 3 hours last night just because I've had a problem going to bed recently. And then I'm gonna just share a little bit of a preview for my channel. But I did an interview with Governor Wes Moore this morning,
fantastic.
where him and I just went outside and we were just throwing the football around a little bit, running a couple of routes. I hit him on a beautiful post. My spiral is still tight. I had to loosen up the shoulder a little bit. He was in dress shoes and he was still moving. So
and people need to know this about you. You're like 6'9" or something like that.
I'm 6'6". I usually tell people when they ask me in public, I tell them 5'10" just to upset the guys around me.
I remember we met one time. You were like, Jim, I would like to have coffee. We met for coffee. And I was like, oh my God, it's like, is this somebody from the NBA coming here?
It's really funny. I don't know. I've distracted us from the topic. We'll get back to it though. But it's always very funny. I've been at a couple of the really great Move On events that they've hosted with, just in Omaha. What a wonderful airport in Omaha, by the way. No offense to everyone in Omaha, but maybe we build that thing out a little bit. But with Elizabeth Warren and Maxwell Frost, and then I was after speaking with Governor Newsom, I was in Phoenix with Rep. Ansari. It was Chris Murphy, Jasmine Crockett, and whenever I have people come up to me at those events, it's always so funny. And I'm sure you get this and have way more in your life than I ever will. But when people just kind of like look at you and they're like, "Is that?" It is, and you kind of have to be like, it is me. Like you come over, but the first thing is like, oh, you're always so tall. But then lots of people have followed it up with, I thought you would be shorter. I was like, well, we could have left that off.
Even in this interview, I find myself sitting up a little bit. I'm just trying to,
Part of it's the hair. I'm just taking up too much space here.
It is. Well, I mean, Jack, I'm really proud of what you've been able to build on YouTube.
I appreciate
It's been extraordinary. And we need more people like you in Generation Z, in the progressive movement, trying to pull, I wrote this in my Substack. You got to leave a little space to pull people over from the other side, or from people who are just, even if they're just bad faith folks, they may have this moment of epiphany at one point where they're like, you know what, maybe I need to cut this stuff out and think about life in a little bit of a bigger way.
Yeah. And
I think the way you approach this is just so smart, because it's not like trying to own the libs or own MAGA or anything like that. It's a thoughtful approach. And I think it's, I would just say, keep at it. Not that you need
really
a tips from me.
Well, again, you're the pro. You saved me a little bit today, so I'll take all the advice that I can get. And you've just been such an inspiration to me. And I remember some of like my first big videos blowing up on YouTube were some of like you shutting down Corey Lewandowski, and like to have someone who displays, even in the face of, and of course, like it's like great to be independent media now, but like in the face of corporate media that just wants to direct what you're doing, to not. To part of my friends, like not take any shit, essentially, and to make it very clear that we have to rise above in this moment.
You can't take any shit. No. You can't take any shit, and sometimes that doesn't always play well in corporate media. I'll just leave it at that. But Jack, let's do this again, man.
Now we get to hang, so
absolutely. Let's do it again, and I'll wear my my Hokas that have the giant heels on them, so I can just. Might get to 6'2", maybe.
I'll slump a little bit.
Slump a little bit.
I always do that.
Jack, great to see you, man. Thanks so much for doing it. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate it, brother.
All right. Talk to you soon. What is extremely important right now, I think, to go back and review where we've been over the last 72 hours is how it is important to wait for the facts to come in, that facts still matter. And in the immediate aftermath of Charlie Kirk being shot, there were all kinds of suppositions and assumptions and a jump to speculation and so on. And it turns out now this Tyler James Robinson, 22, of Washington, Utah, who was arrested on suspicion of aggravated murder, felony discharge of a firearm, and so on, that he's a bit of a mystery at this point, and we're still learning more about him. And I'm sure there are a lot of folks who are my age, and Tara and I were talking about, being in the 50 category now, and it's a little hard to swallow sometimes, and so on. But it is a strange and I think foreign concept to be thinking about somebody engraving on an unfired cartridge, "Hey, fascist, catch," and another message saying, "If you read this, you are gay, LMAO," laughing my ass off. And then messages cited by officials from this young man also included up arrow, right arrow, 3 down arrow symbols. Another engraving said, notices bulges, OWO, what's this? I'm assuming if there are folks, absorbing this information as I'm saying it right now, they're probably saying to themselves what I'm saying, that this sounds like hieroglyphics or something. It just doesn't make any sense. And I think we need to hit the pause button and do a deep dive perhaps on what is going on online and what some of our young people, whether they're our kids or our grandkids, are doing on their screens until whatever hour it is in the morning. And, it was something that the governor of Utah, Spencer Cox, who I think was striking the right tone, was saying earlier today. Let's play a little bit of that. I know we're running a little over, but let's play it a little bit and I'll wrap it up pretty quickly after that.
Or the beginning of a darker chapter in our history. Look, I mean, if you look at true political assassinations in this country of someone of this stature, this feels a lot like the late 60s, and having one so gruesomely displayed on camera in all of our hands and in all of our pockets. We are not wired as human beings biologically. Historically, we have not evolved in a way that we are capable of processing those types of violent imagery. And by the way, we've seen another one with a gruesome stabbing very recently that went viral. This is not good for us. It is not good to consume. Social media is a cancer on our society right now. And I would encourage people to log off, turn off, touch grass, hug a family member, go out and do good in your community. That is happening, and it's happening organically right now. Had a friend in a small city in Utah who said, we're getting together. The Republicans and Democrats in my little town are getting together to have a discussion last night, just to find a way to find their better angels. So yes, this could.
Hear, hear. Here is what I say to the governor of Utah, Spencer Cox. I think that those are exactly the right kind of comments. And I just want to, as we close out just a very difficult week, and as we're heading into the weekend, and if you're watching this over the weekend, thank you for watching this program, subscribing to this program, and so on. But spend a little time touching grass. Spend a little time offline. Spend a little time hugging a relative. Spend a little time thinking about something other than yet another crazy week in the news in America. And let's start thinking about whether we can somehow come to grips with what the governor was just saying a few moments ago, that what is happening online in our world right now is a cancer. It is a cancer. And our kids are swimming in it. They're immersed in it. They're doing God knows what online in these gaming worlds that we don't understand. And I don't want to sound like one of the olds here. I get that a lot of kids can have fun playing games. I grew up playing video games. I played Atari and all of those things growing up. There's no question about it. But there's something to be said for, we cannot just drown ourselves in online content, online garbage, online trash. And we better be damn sure we know what our kids are consuming in that world. It is not the world that exists when we go outside and touch grass. And I think it's something to think about. A lot of people formed some assumptions this week that were wrong. They were wrong. And it is probably asking too much for some of those folks who were calling for war and so on and saying we're at war. It's probably too much to ask that they do some deep thinking and contemplate. Perhaps maybe they got a little carried away. Maybe they got a little over their skis in the aftermath of something like this. We are still Americans. We are still one country. We need to have a little bit of faith in one another. Even if the guy in the Oval Office is totally disinterested in that, and I grant you that. But that doesn't mean the rest of us have to give up on what the governor was talking about, reconnecting in a real human way, away from this other universe, this other world that exists online, which, as it turns out, not always good for us. Want to thank Jack Cottrella. Really appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for watching all week. We did a lot of coverage on what took place in Utah. And thanks for everybody watching. I know a lot of people were watching, subscribing, and so on. Once again, thank you for supporting this program. It means a lot. Still reporting from Washington, I'm Jim Acosta.